But now he was just a shadow of that guy. Fraker found it hard to believe this wreck was the same person. How the mighty have fallen. He was suddenly reminded of Charlie, and how he had idolized Whitaker. And for the 148th first time could see him going the same way, shit out of luck, alone, scared. Anger came out of nowhere. "Just look at you," said Fraker, even surprising himself at the venom in his voice. "You had it all, now? Christ, what have you gotten yourself into? Believe me, all that money, the power, it means nothing. I'd give it all up in a heartbeat, if it could get me out of this shit I'm in. It means nothing in the end. I can't protect myself from these people." Whitaker paused, staring off into space with a haunted look that sent a shiver down Fraker's spine. "That Yank," he said after an age, "Christ, the things I've heard about him. The shit he can do." "What, Randall?" asked Fraker. "So," continued Whitaker. "It is him." His voice trailed off again, then he suddenly looked Fraker in the eye, and for the first time held his gaze. "Christ, man, what the hell are you doing working for a thing like that? I didn't know Harry Lynn was mixed up in all this. I thought he got where he is the good old-fashioned dishonest way." "We're not mixed up with anyone," Fraker said, a little taken aback. "I'm just babysitting this Yank until we can track down McCulloch. Then I just walk away and let him get on with it." Whitaker looked at him with genuine amusement, and Fraker had to fight the urge to smack him in the mouth. "That simple, eh?" Whitaker said knowingly. "Seem to remember that's what I used to keep telling myself. Oh, they're nothing special, powerful? Yeah. But where do you think power like that comes from, Fraker?" He paused for a response, but Fraker could only think of how Lynn had looked back in his office when all this had started. "They have made a lot of powerful people very nervous." "No, my friend," Whitaker continued. "You get mixed up with people like that, there's no going back. Take my advice, get out while you still can." "Don't worry about me," Fraker said a little on the defensive, "I can take care of myself. Besides, you're hardly in the position to give me advice, Whitaker." Whitaker's gaze drifted away again. "True, but you get mixed up with them. It stains you, it stains your soul." He shook his head and muttered something Fraker couldn't hear, then added. "That Randall, he's just a foot soldier, but he's one of the worst. Christ, the things I've heard about that one." "You talk about him like he's the devil himself," said Fraker. "May as well be," replied Whitaker. He looked back at Fraker. "So what are you going to tell him about me?" "That you're a nutter." Whitaker took a step towards Fraker, who clenched his fist, but the move was desperate, not threatening. Whitaker held up a trembling hand and lightly touched Fraker's chest. "You tell him." His voice faltered, think with emotion. "You convince him that I don't know where Larry is. You have to." He suddenly raced over to his jacket, which was hanging over the back of a chair, and took out his wallet. He waved it in Fraker's face. "Look, I can give you money, shit loads of it, as much as you like. Just don't tell him where I am," he pleaded. Fraker knocked his hand away. "I don't want your money." Yes, you do," Whitaker said with growing desperation. "And also, and this bit is important. Don't even think about this place, don't think about any of it, what it looks like, where it is, how you got here. Don't think about any of that, and you'll be rich. I told you I don't want none of it, or he'll know." Whitaker cut him off. "He'll know how to get here." He was growing frantic now, and Fraker gave serious thought to slapping the maniac, hard. But Whitaker was oblivious to this as he was in full flow now. "Oh, Jesus," he babbled. "For Christ's sake, don't even say my name anymore, he'll know, like a shark." He suddenly dropped to his knees and scrambled over to where he had flicked what Fraker had thought was a gold nugget of some kind. The tooth, Jesus. He found it and held it up for Fraker to see. "Oh, thank Christ." Fraker recoiled. "What the hell are you talking about? Say your name. What fucking difference will that make?" He looked down in disbelief at the gold tooth in Whitaker's grubby hand. "Snap out of it," he shouted, and without thinking slapped Whitaker across the face. Whitaker's mouth fell open in shock and he stared up at Fraker, stunned. "Next time it won't be a fucking love tap, Whitaker, now pull yourself together," Fraker shouted, his heart pounding in his ears. What the fucking hell had just happened? Fraker thought. 1 minute Whitaker was trying to bribe him, which was thankfully the first normal thing he'd done since Fraker had entered this god-forsaken room. The next he was babbling about sharks and scrambling around on the floor like a lunatic. He grabbed Whitaker's shirt collar and dragged him to his feet. "I can't protect myself," Whitaker finally said. Fraker let him go and half expected him to fall to his knees again, but Whitaker just stood there with blood dripping from his mouth. "You should sit down, Tommy," Before you fall down. Whitaker nodded, barely comprehending, but didn't move. Fraker took hold of his arms and gently led him over to the room's tatty sofa, and he finally slumped down into it. You got anything to drink? Asked Fraker. Whitaker shook his head. He looked down at the tooth still clutched in his hand. Can't protect myself, he said softly, to no one in particular. Who was I trying to kid? It's too late for all that now, always was. He let the tooth fall onto the floor again and looked up at Fraker. He's been waiting all this time. Waiting for it all to fall into place. Christ, he probably knew the moment you said my name at the door. He kicked the tooth away in disgust. Not this again, thought Fraker. He was going to speak, but there was something about the way Whitaker sat there, like a lost child who knew his parents had long since abandoned him, that robbed Fraker of anything to say but banalities, and this sure wasn't the time for those. Then Whitaker's gaze drifted off again, into the shadows. I should kill myself, he said in a whisper. Kill myself and be done with all this horror, before he gets to me. At least it would be quick. But I'm too much of a coward. Shit, don't even know if it would make any difference anyway. He smiled, but it melted from his face a heartbeat later. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Whitaker got to his feet and straightened his shirt, which now had spots of blood on it from his busted lip. And Fraker thought that maybe he was rallying somewhat. What's going on, Tommy? Asked Fraker. Be careful who you do business with, Mr. Fraker, Whitaker said. That's the moral here. I was warned, can't say I wasn't. Walked into this whole sorry mess with my eyes wide open. Ha, me and Larry both. A thin smile cracked his weary face, and this time it stuck. Damn fool still thinks he's going to be able to bullshit his way out of all this, Whitaker continued bitterly. Fucking idiot, he has no idea what's coming. Oh, but he will soon enough. Tried telling him, but he just wouldn't listen. So you have spoken to him? Said Fraker, finally an opening. Yeah, few days ago. Don't know why I bothered, he thought I was as mad as you do. But he'll see. You will too if you're not careful. He pointed an accusing finger at Fraker. If that was a threat, it had no weight at all. Fraker took his mobile out of his pocket and opened up the address book. Give me his number, that's a start at least, he said. Whitaker brightened a little at this, seeing a chink of light in his situation. Yeah, that's a good idea. But if I give it to you, you have to convince Randall to leave me alone. Tell him that's all I know, tell him I'm not worth bothering with. He looked at Fraker hopefully. I mean, it's like you said, it's Larry he wants, right? He was hanging on Fraker's reply, but what could he say? Whitaker was as dead as McCulloch, he'd be trampled in the stampede to get to the old crook. That's right, Tommy. He lied, I'll talk to the Yank. He passed his phone to Whitaker, who punched in a number and handed it back. You tell him, he said weakly. And with that he fell back onto the sofa. The lawyer's shoulders slumped and he rested his elbows on his knees, and Fraker couldn't think of ever seeing a more pathetic, defeated soul in his life, and it was chilling. What's this all about, Tommy? Fraker asked after what seemed like minutes. Why are they after him? Does it matter? Whitaker replied. There's more to it than that damned book of his, isn't there? Suddenly Fraker wasn't sure he actually wanted to know. He was about to turn and leave when Whitaker gave him a haunted look which stopped him dead. It started with the people, said Whitaker. People? The look in his eyes made Fraker physically shudder. Whitaker took a moment to gather his thoughts. By the look on his face, Fraker knew he was going to some place buried deep at the back of his mind, a place Fraker now regretted asking about even before he had heard what was lurking there. McCulloch had got himself involved in people trafficking, in Eastern Europe. Nothing big, just sort of a sideline really. He'd cut a deal to transport 6 illegal immigrants from Poland. Didn't know why, didn't care, neither of us did. He shook his head at his foolishness. We just thought they were going to be used as cheap labor or something. The whole thing was sordid as hell, but if I'm honest, it was a bit of an adventure. All we had to do was get them from Poland to England without getting caught. Simple enough, easy money. Obviously not easy enough, said Fraker. Should have been, but then Larry got greedy and decided to pull a burn on our mysterious employers. Whitaker raised his eyebrows and Fraker detected a familiar if faint glint in his eye. It was quite clever, to be fair, Whitaker continued. He took money from everyone, and I willingly went along with it. He took the money from Randall's people, to transport them to England, as agreed. Then, from those 6 sorry bastards to take them elsewhere. They didn't care where, just as long as it was away from Randall's lot. Whitaker smiled now, it was youth that lit up his face. Then, and get this, from some French bloke, who needed cheap labor. Christ knows where they finally ended up in the end. Working in some Paris kitchen for €5 an hour most like. Whitaker gave a rueful shake of the head. Poor bastards. That's it? Said Fraker. All this for 6 nobodies? He knew it didn't add up and that he should just leave it alone, but he just couldn't. Bollocks, he added, even though it would open up a can of worms. After a moment, Whitaker's face grew darker. Should have been, he said softly. The whole fucking thing can't have cost them more than 20 grand. And what's that to them? Sure, we knew they'd be pissed off, but... His voice trailed off as if the gravity of the situation had just dawned on him. This is about more than money. What was so special about those 6 pulls? Asked Fraker. Whitaker physically winced at the question but didn't answer, he just exhaled and looked at his feet again. Fraker felt a twinge of anger. He was rapidly getting the feeling he was in the middle of something bad, but he had to drag anything remotely resembling a straight answer out of Whitaker and it was wearing thin. He felt out of his depth, lost, and it wasn't a feeling he liked. He'd always been taught not to ask too many questions, to keep things simple and under control, and it had served him well through the years, but this was different. Randall and his mysterious employers were the wild cards here, something he couldn't control. That look in Lynn's eye flashed into Fraker's head again. Although with the boss it had been only fleeting, Whitaker had that same look permanently etched on his face. And it was one that Fraker increasingly feared might be catching these 6, Fraker finally said again. What was so special about them? They were special somehow, Whitaker replied softly. Then shrugged as though he didn't really know why. Important to Randall's people. Not some random meat, slave labor or whatever. No, they were special, marked for something big. They all had a tattoo somewhere on their bodies. One each, which were apparently 6 parts that made up a whole picture of some kind. Some old runic thing as I remember. But to be honest, I didn't dig too deeply into the significance of it. And Larry just plain didn't care. He exhaled. Christ, I dread to think what it was for. But the point is, it turns out they were irreplaceable. And you and Larry blew it for them, said Fraker. Whitaker nodded and looked at him. And now we're damned, he said plainly. Damned. Such a strange word to choose, but looking at him, it was plain to see at least Whitaker believed it. Fraker had to look away from the man. He glanced at the door and decided enough was enough. So, this book of Larry's has nothing to do with any of this. Ha, he thinks it's his get-out-of-jail-free card. He thinks the government can protect him. But no one can, not from Randall. He's just... Fraker paused. Just what? He's not human. Whitaker answered the question for him. It was a statement of fact, to Whitaker at least, and he said it without a hint of embarrassment. Oh, come on, Fraker snapped, more at himself for letting Whitaker spook him than anything else. Listen to yourself. That was it. Fraker took a step towards the door, but Whitaker stood up and grabbed his arm. It was so unexpected, it took Fraker a moment to process that he'd done it. He felt the grip through his jacket sleeve, surprisingly strong, and for the second time tonight he wished he'd brought along the Beretta. He looked at Whitaker's hand for a full 5 seconds before finally pulling his arm free. Don't touch me, he said, almost lamely. I know how it sounds, Whitaker actually grinned, but it soon faded. But believe me, once he catches up with Larry, he's gonna wish it was just those crooked police and pissed off gangsters that got him. Fraker rubbed his arm without realizing it. He could feel the bruise already. They would only torture him for a couple of days, continued Whitaker, his voice so cold Fraker expected to see it in the air. That would seem like bliss compared to what Randall's people have in store for him. Fighting the desire to run from the room, Fraker backed away and opened the door behind him without turning around. He half expected Whitaker to grab him again, but he merely nodded. The stagnant air in the corridor smelt almost fresh compared to the oppressive odor of despair in Whitaker's room. Fraker turned and took a couple of steps.